Okay, so we're trying to stay back on track with the schedule. And so up next is going to be our transition is talking about where we're headed, where we've been, where we're headed. And we're going to have Peter Brown actually talk about that.
Does this mic? It does not, so we need this one.
Or a level.
Wearable. No, I'm going to try and stay put. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay at the back? Yep, I'm seeing some noddings. That's good enough for me. Okay, so what I want to try and do over about a 15-minute period is just to try and give a overview of some of the highlights and even some of the low points of our work over the last year. At the Management Council meeting this morning, preceding the opening of plenary, we had quite an extensive discussion on this. We had a complete roundtable of the whole Management Council asking for input on this discussion. And I think what I'm going to try and do is, from that discussion, synthesize some of the key issues, and then go on to looking at what the sort of main challenges are and high points going forward into 2015. So I asked everyone this morning to sort of give some examples and thoughts about positives and negatives in the work of the organization. I think it's healthy in an organization to take stock of yourself, to identify your strengths and your weaknesses. So on the plus side of the chart, and there was a lot on the plus side of the chart, we incorporated. We became a 501c3 and 501c6 corporation established in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And to get to that stage for any organization takes time and effort, and it was a major achievement that we did that in 2014, going into 2014. And we're still a unique enterprise. There is no organization like IDESG anywhere else. It brings together the widest range of stakeholder types, let alone just being a multi-stakeholder group. It's a multi-stakeholder type group in a way that we rarely see in the non-for-profit sector. And certainly in this area on identity and trust, it's unique. So we incorporated and we exist as a very unique enterprise, and that's something which we ought to keep in mind. We've also hit some and moved from some key internal milestones. We have a strategic plan in place. We have a development plan for the identity ecosystem framework, which is the foundation of everything that this organization is about. We've seen the development of a functional model, which will underpin that framework. And we've seen the approval of a standards adoption policy and a methodology for us being able to incorporate into a standards register publicly available standards that can be used as part of the operation of the future ecosystem framework. I'd also sort of make a call out for the diversity and depth of volunteer effort that we have in the organization. We have a wide range of people involved with very, very different backgrounds, and that's been one of the strengths and backbone to the volunteer effort that's been necessary to drive this organization forward. Also in 2014, we've seen contractors coming on board as part of the establishment as a 501c3, and the fact that we now have our own budget to manage and resources essentially from the grant funding from the Instig NPO. That funding and the management of that funding has meant we've decided to use a lot of that to bring in contractors to do the professionals and provide the professional support for us. And we now have 3 contractors in place dealing with the sort of core administrative and organizational support for the Framework Management Office and for internal external communications. And I'm very pleased that we've got the teams from all of those 3 companies here. And the first one, Global Inventures, are responsible for a lot of the infrastructure we see and that we don't see, and keeping the ball rolling and keeping the lights on and keeping the organization functioning. The standards organization, OASIS, is responsible for the Framework Management Office, and we'll be hearing from them very shortly in terms of the work that they've been started up on since they got in the seat in September. And more recently, we concluded a contract with Connolly Works to work on our internal and external messaging and communications, and we'll be hearing from them after the break, after this session. On the not so good side, on the negative side, one big concern still is there's not enough meat, there's not enough there. We've done there's a lot of effort expended in a lot of committees, but we still don't have enough deliverables towards building that ecosystem framework. We've even missed one of our key milestones, which was the development of the first version of the IDEF by the end of 2014. So it's a sobering thought to think, if you missed one milestone and it's the first one, be careful in terms of where your planning's going. We've been beset by distractions. It's been a drain on everyone. It's led to loss of momentum, even to loss of members. It causes inefficiencies, with a lot of effort being made for very little output, and it's something which the growing consensus has to stop. We have to start focusing on the key work of the organization. It's not to say that some of the issues raised are not important, and I'll come back to this in a moment. Another major concern was signal-to-noise ratio is too low. Lots of meta conversations and discussions about process and governance and how we do this and how we do that. And also lack of expertise, interestingly. A lot of enthusiasm for doing stuff, but sometimes lack of expertise, which means people are going back to first principles because they haven't really understood what the particular issue is. And it's sometimes feels in some committees, it's the blind leading the blind, or people who are very committed to getting stuff done, but don't really have the tools or the expertise or the professionalism to be able to move things forward. I think there's also a sense of confusion. The structures, the processes we have. I presented this some months ago to the board as a problem. It's an organization starting off. If you have a simple set of rules, it's easy to add complexity as you need it, as you develop as an organization. We started with a very, very set of complex rules, and there are reasons for that. Very unsure about who we were dealing with, and such a complex group, and nobody really being sure of anybody else. But we started with a very complex set of rules, and moving from complex to simple is actually quite complex. And that's a challenge we have to live with and face. But there's also confusion about our objectives, our core objectives, and the roles of who's doing what. So that's something we need to take stock of. Another issue was raised was internal communications between committees and plenary, between committees and the Management Council, between Management Council and the board, despite it actually being the same people on two bodies. What are we actually responsible for? Are we wearing our Management Council hat now or our board hat? And this is an important issue because when we incorporated, the rules of incorporation under the as a 501c3 and under the Commonwealth of Virginia requires that as a corporation you have a board of directors who have fiduciary responsibility for the organization. And as people will recall who were involved in that process at the time and the discussions we had about a year ago on this, we said rather than try and go through another process of deciding what the governance rules about that were, let's start with having members of the Management Council who are elected by plenary be the board. Now, we're coming up into election season, and call for candidates went out for last week, and there'll be many people restanding, and there'll be many new candidates, and that's great. And it's important to underline that when you stand as a candidate for the Management Council, be under no illusion that that also involves being a full fiduciary and responsible member of the board of directors. As we discussed this morning, we felt it was important to underline that to plenary so that any candidate who's keen to stand, and we want people to stand, but people understand that it's not just standing for the Management Council, which is governed by the rules of association, of the initial unincorporated organization. You also become a director of a 501 corporation with legal and fiduciary responsibilities. And I think it's fair that people are aware of that. And we're preparing a note which we discussed in the Management Council, in the board, this morning. Even I don't get it always right. And we will be making available also online so that candidates can actually see, well, what am I signing up for if I'm going to be a candidate? I think, in full disclosure, it's important that people understand that. And that's important because the board has that responsibility. We're responsible for staffing. We're responsible for the budget. We're responsible for the contractors. The committees aren't. And it's not to say the committees don't do anything good. Of course they do. They do the core policy development work of this organization. But what we have to find is the right comfort zone and combination of the various responsibilities and clarify those issues. A final issue that was raised, which was a concern by a number of members of the Management Council, was we've got, as I mentioned, we've got enormous, diverse volunteer effort, but we risk frittering away a valuable resource. Every volunteer provides their time as a volunteer, and if volunteers feel that their time is not being well used because we're going down rat holes or we're avoiding getting into the meat and the substance of the work we're supposed to be doing, then people drop off. People lose enthusiasm and momentum starts being lost. So in terms of trying to sum up where we should be going, I think there's a key message, which is get good stuff done and be clear about what we're doing. This is the year we've got to get stuff done. We missed a deadline for our first deliverable, which was agreed by the board and management council, which we gave the heads up for to plenary, which is part of the reason why we're getting funding from the federal government still is because they believe we can still deliver against a set of objectives. So we've got to start getting serious about getting stuff done and getting stuff out the door. Now, a lot of us are still a bit nervous and self-conscious, and are we doing it the right way? Well, I think it's time to start being iterative in the way we do that. Get a product out the door. It may be imperfect, but let us not be in a situation where the best is the enemy of the good. We've got to get initial deliverables out there, let the market start to see what we're doing. I mean, somebody mentioned this morning, if IDESG were in the forest and crying, would anybody be there to hear us? Well, that's part of the problem at the moment. Is there anybody out there listening to what we're doing? And they will only start listening when we've got something to actually show them as solid material. Underline again, volunteer effort is critical. But in saying that, I want to underline a point, because it's been a bit of a diversion. It's one which I just want to sort of knock on the head straight away here. We're all volunteers. There's not good volunteers or bad volunteers or professional volunteers or better volunteers. Whether you're an unemployed person who's putting time aside to work with us, whether you're a consultant like I am, for whom investment of time in IDESG represents an opportunity cost, whether you're a full-time employee of a large corporation who's had to fight internally to get the time and convince their management to get the time and the resources to take part in work of the IDESG. We are all volunteers, and I really don't want to hear conversations which talk about there are different classes of volunteers, and oh yeah, well you can do that because of this. No, we all have the same challenges, we all have the same opportunity costs, and we're all in it together as volunteers. Now, we're all volunteers, and we're volunteers from very, very, very different backgrounds, which means culture clash in terms of organizational expectations, the way things are done. And this was the real driver behind the idea of a code of conduct, which was approved by the board last December and was presented to the online plenary, not without controversy and not without faults. It's imperfect. It's a first version. This is the whole point. But the code of conduct was designed to give us all a common way of handling issues, conflicts, process, escalating unresolved problems or issues that people might have in the work we're doing. But it's a code of conduct primarily to defend the interests of the organization. Because if IDESG is going to thrive, it'll thrive on constructive engagement by all of us. And the code of conduct is there to give us a sort of handbook and a sort of highway code for us to be able to work on that. So it's a tool to help us all. The other tool to help us is the professional staff. We are volunteers. We're good at some stuff some of the time, but not always all of the time. But that's why we bring on professionals. And I've mentioned the three sets of contractors that we have. But in addition to the three contractors, we are now also in a position to engage our first employee. And it gives me great pleasure to be able to announce to the plenary now that based on a unanimous decision of the board, which has the responsibility for this, and based on a search committee which went through a whole series of candidates, did 2 rounds of interviews, and an agreement, absolute agreement at the end of the candidate we chose, I'm pleased to announce that the executive director for IDESG will be Mark Anthony Signorino. And if Mark Anthony, if he's here, come and join me on the platform. So, graduate of Northeastern University, School of Law. You're at Boston as well, I think, before that.
Boston University.
Boston University, political science. What was BS?
Advertising and communications.
Advertising and communications. Well, it's about the same thing, isn't it?
BS, yeah.
BS, exactly. Policy analyst at eBay, 5 years as a director and executive director in the American Electronics Association, now known Tech America. Involved in general affairs, government affairs and tech policy. 3 years as a director of tech policy at the National Association of Manufacturers. General counsel, Secure ID Coalition. 4 years as vice president and general counsel for his own consulting firm. And secretary of our own privacy committee. So someone who's been in the organization from day one, knows what this organization's about, and is still willing to accept the job as executive director. He has my vote. I'll just hand over to you, Mark Anthony.
Great.
Welcome on board, and great to have you.
Great. Thank you, guys. Everybody here in the room. Thanks. I want to thank everybody here in the room. I want to thank the 900 people online who are participating. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank, the Peter, Kim, Jeremy, Dave Burhop who led the selection committee for putting your trust in me. My job here is to be a resource. It's a resource for the board, management council, the committees, the NPO, the FMO, inventors, to make sure that we're doing what we need to be doing. Get good product out the door on a timely manner. So I'm here to help. I want to make sure that everybody's heard. I want to make sure that I'm available to everybody to hear what your concerns are, so we can get good product out the door on time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
There you go.
There we go. And rounding this up and sort of keeping to that theme of getting stuff done, I'd like to invite Paul Knight from the Framework Management Office, who's going to give us a sort of overview of their sort of baptism of fire since October last year in starting getting stuff done. Over to you, Paul. If you want to use that clip mic, that's probably going to be the easiest.
Sure.
I'll leave it to you.
Very good.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Peter. Well, thank you all. I wonder if we can turn down the spotlight so we can actually see the screen a little bit. Okay, great, thanks. Oh, thank you. Forward, okay. Great. Okay, again, my name is Paul Knight. I'm with the Framework Management Office, which is contracted with OASIS Open, the standards organization. And what I'm going to do is really cover what we've been able to accomplish over the last, I guess, since the last plenary in person in Tampa, so since September, and where we're going next. Okay. A little bit of background. At Tampa, the Management Council had just previously approved a couple of important documents that really covered that set the direction for the organization going forward. So we had the strategic plan and the framework plan, the identity ecosystem framework plan. And the strategic plan is the overall roadmap. The framework plan then is really focusing on how we'll get the identity ecosystem framework delivered as a product, and initially first as a trust mark program or attestation, self-attestation program. So let's look at where we are with the framework plan. The first thing I'll do is review the overall plan as it was presented in September, and then look at where we are based on that. Nope. Okay. So I'm borrowing slides. I think Jack and Andrew may have fit these slides together back in September. But at that time, we were saying within the 9 months, we'd have the baseline requirements development complete, and implement in terms of implementing the framework, be able to put together a self-assessment program against these baseline requirements. The full requirements, will be ongoing during that time, and we start to develop the third-party assessor relationships and begin that process. After that, again, we're looking at what was said back in September, that within, beyond that, in the 9 to 18 month framework, we'd have the full requirements complete. We'd be able to be rolling out the self-assessment against those requirements. And we'd be working on electronic trust mark management, start with third-party assessments against the baseline requirements. So having someone else, beyond the party themselves assessing their capabilities. Then the community of interest requirements. This is the area where we would expect to see the specific communities of interest, financial area, healthcare in particular. We would expect to see some of those being put forward and integrated with the earlier requirements. And then finally, in the longer term, completing those community of interest requirements, really having the third-party assessment program in full swing. Okay, so let's look at where we are. Again, summarizing what we just saw there, we are talking about, at that time, having development of baseline requirements by early 2015, do the parallel work with user experience, input into how we would present a self-assessment program. Again, early in 2015. The key target that we really, we still have a chance to meet this. We heard Peter say we've missed a deadline, but the first deadline, which is a product that goes out to the world, actually is the baseline self-assessment program. That is within reach. That is something that I think that we have the steps in place, and we'll see this throughout this meeting. The requirements for this self-assessment program and the requirements that we're going to present to the world really are, very well underway. So it's definitely not gloom and doom. We are again development of full set of requirements by about this time next year. And again, parallel work on trust marks and with third-party assessors. So that's the plan. let's take a look at where we're going. So what I'll do real quickly is recap what we've been doing since September, and then look at what the next steps are according to the plan. So we'll cover several areas: the functional requirements, which I want to thank all of you for your contributions in getting the requirements in, so that we'd have something along that line to discuss and really have a chance to look at those at this meeting. The self-assessment program, and then the standards inventory and the standards catalog, which are two related but different things. I think, okay. Did want to mention, we have a dashboard which is really tracking each of the deliverables that are intended to be shared among committees, so that if a deliverable is expected to go beyond a committee, then we'd like to see it tracked on the dashboard. Need to know, who's particularly responsible for it within the committee. We'd like to know the milestone dates, and we'd be very happy. Feedback to me, again, Paul Knight, if any status information on these deliverables. This is something I'll be following up with the chairs of the committees to track each of the deliverables, so that we can keep this dashboard updated. So the dashboard at this point is now linked to the front page of the IDESG website. So when you'll see that it's not incredibly exciting, but it does allow tracking each of the deliverables. We also have what you'll find through the dashboard is kind of a simplified version of a large spreadsheet that has all kinds of tracking variables. If you're interested in that, we can make that available to you as well. Okay, as we go through, a couple of the other slides mention specific deliverables, and they'll have like a committee identifier and a number following that, and that's the number that tracks back to the dashboard, in case you want to check the specific status of it. So the dashboard itself is, as useful as it is, there's room for improvement. The status update process is a little bit uneven. I need to work with you to make sure that we get updates in real time. As you complete a deliverable, or as you're passing a particular milestone within the deliverable, let me know about it, and we'll make sure that it gets reflected, so other people who are depending on that deliverable will be able to know what's going on. For some of the deliverables, I don't have a point of contact, who's responsible for accomplishing it, so need to update that. And again, I'll be following up with the committee chairs and so on over the next little while. Another thing with the dashboard, and I think tomorrow you'll see some other representations of the relationship between deliverables. Right now, the dashboard is kind of a spreadsheet type approach. It doesn't really clearly articulate the way that deliverables feed into each other as we're progressing through time. So that's, other representations of what's there are going to be developed over time. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to focus on is the functional requirements. This has been the big driving force for the last couple of months. So the committees, the plan was that the committees would generate requirements statements by January. In actuality, what we have here is, for the plenary meeting, we requested that the committees submit their requirement statements in whatever form they're in, and some of them are completed by January 15th. So we got input from all of the committees where we were expecting them. So, give yourselves a hand. Thank you for that. Okay, the dashboard items that are, where these are listed there. And then if you want to look at the the requirements, the full requirement spreadsheets, those are available. We put together a quick summary which is just a list of the specific requirement statement without a lot of the other related details, and that's available at the link here. Let's see. Okay, tomorrow, so what's going on next with the requirements? Tomorrow we'll have a couple of hours of a session. That'll be the highlight of the morning. Once you've had your silver skillet meal, the next highlight of the morning perhaps will be a detailed look at what's going on with some of the requirement statements and really the positioning of that going forward. So looking at common themes, if there are any missing pieces, but we'll get a little bit more detail on that session later today. So a key point is that we need a clear deadline for getting in the final requirements. So that'll be something that we'll need to establish very shortly. Most of the committees already have proposed a deadline for getting in the final versions. So we'll need to make a clear deadline for that. And we also need to make sure that committees and anyone else who wishes to suggest a requirement, will, for the first round, we'll get it in by the deadline. We've had questions or requests for how do I submit requirements from places outside of the four committees where we were expecting them, and we've made that information available. So it's certainly, we're accepting the requirement statements from really any source at this point. But they need to be in by the deadline in order to get through this first iteration, to be included in the initial program. After that, then TIFTM will, the Trust Framework and Trustmark Committee will begin its review, and we'll start with the process of turning those requirements into a self-attestation program. Okay. Now, the self-assessment or self-attestation program is not, has not been, it's a lot of the planning for that has already been undertaken. It's quite far along, but it's not going to be able to do anything until we get the requirements and get those agreed. So there have been a couple of documents and deliverables that are produced by the TIFTM committee. Those are listed here. The Risk Assessment Framework, Identity Ecosystem Acceptance Policy. So there's been significant progress on these. We need to get those finished up, as we roll out the self-assessment program. From the User Experience Committee, there's a deliverable of usability guidelines for this Trustmark program. What is it that someone sees, someone who wants to participate to self-assess against the program and to join the program? What are they going to see as an interface, or what's their experience? So we're looking for input from the User Experience Committee on that aspect. Again, needs to be completed in early 2015. We'll push for that. Okay. Events over the last, I think this has been mentioned by several people. I think Kim and Peter both mentioned that the standards approval policy is in place. We'll be talking later on at this plenary about the Security Association markup language. The SAML, which is nominated for approval. That's not right. It's not Security Association. Security Assertions. Thank you. Yes, thank you. I knew that didn't sound quite right. Thank you. Security Assertion markup language. How you pass a security assertion from one party to another, and do that in a way that you can be sure that it hasn't been changed. Okay, Stakeholders have nominated a number of other standards, and it's easy, and we're expecting that pipeline to grow. So, Kathy will be very happy to have additional standards nominated and examined by the standards committee. Okay. Now, there are a couple of aspects of the standards catalog that need to be just clarified. There's an inventory, which is a list of all a lot of potential relevant standards, and it's very easy to add something to the inventory if you think that there's something missing that needs to be there. The catalog, on the other hand, is approved standards, and we're just beginning with that. Kathy?
Paul, just one clarification.
Registry, okay. Thank you. Okay.
Inventory and catalog are actually the same thing.
Okay. The registry.
It's the registry.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. All right. That boy. Okay. The next thing I'd like to present is talking about staffing support for committee projects. That there is IDESG provided funding for engagement of subcontractor staff. It's administered by the plenary chair and the executive director as well. That's specific projects to accelerate the framework plan that when the volunteers only have a certain amount of time in many cases to work on things, and additional help is needed. So there is funding available to support additional professional support to help get products out. So the first approved request was from the Security Committee, and this was kind of an informal, I call it a trial balloon, but a discussion of some of the proposed security functional requirements, and circulated for comment from various members of the identity ecosystem community. So we'll hear a report about that on Friday. I think we may also discuss a little bit of it tomorrow. And this may be a pilot for a larger effort with all the requirements. Okay. Another important task is really maintaining or updating some of the approved deliverables. Some examples are there's the dashboard, or the glossary, the standards glossary. The functional model, which was approved and presented at the, I guess it was approved at the Tampa Plenary. The use cases document is being worked on at this point. So these are things that where they've been through multiple iterations, and a lot of potential for ongoing support there. Okay, so we'll discuss some of the ways that we can maintain these. I guess we'll be working with some of the committees during the meeting here and talking about that. Okay, so that's really what I wanted to cover, kind of an update on where we've been, what's going forward, and again a riff on a slide we saw in Tampa. With the production of the requirements, we've kind of moved to the first chapter of the book. We've got the roots of our first product underway, so we're making progress, but we've got a long way to go. Great, thank you. And at this point,